finished the textures for my turtle and for my scene, and before we can start working with them over inside of Blender or even publishing them to Sketchfab, we need to export them from Substance Painter so that we can use them in whatever direct content creation application or distribution software that we're going to use for our 3D models. So I'm pretty pleased with the results. This is looking pretty good. And FYI, if you want to get a full screen view of your model, the Tab key inside of Substance Painter is going to maximize your 3D viewport. In addition, you can also start to change it a little bit. So if you just want to see your 2D textures as well, this is just a really great little trick, the Tab key, to maximize whatever viewport you're currently sitting in. So I'm pretty pleased with the result that I've gotten so far here, and it's time for us to start exporting these textures so we can use them in other workflows and in other applications. So to do so, we go to the top of the screen under the File menu, and you can see right here we have this options to export textures. And this is going to bring up a pretty important dialog box with a lot of different options. We're going to start with the settings and then work our way over to physically exporting our textures from the app and into another environment. The first thing that we need to look at are all the global settings. We want to ensure that we're exporting the texture sets that we desire. Now, for my project, on my little turtle here, I have two texture sets, one for the body and one for the shell. And we were working on those earlier in the project, and I'm pretty pleased with the results that we've created. So we're going to export both of them at the exact same time. Inside this middle section here, there's some really important things that we need to dial in. First and foremost, you got to be very mindful of the location that you're sending all of these textures. As a suggestion, make sure you're sending all of these textures and exporting them into a folder. Don't just put them on your desktop, because there's going to be a lot of these. For every texture set, we're going to be producing at least 5 different images. So you're going to have a bunch of these items that you're going to need to manage. Put them in a folder is a good idea. The output template is going to define how these images are created and how the lighting effects and all of the wonderful layering effects that we've built here in Substance Painter are going to be translated into a physical texture map itself. Now, I'm using the PBR metallic roughness. This is a great kind of middle of the road export preset. As you click on this list, you can see that there are a lot, and often 9 times out of 10, you want to find an output template that matches your workflow. So if you're going to be publishing textures that's going to go into the CryEngine or into the Maxwell rendering engine, or if you want to send it over into a RenderMan or a Unity, they have a whole series of wonderful export and output templates that are perfect for each one of those rendering environments. Now, we're going to be rendering our objects inside of Sketchfab. In addition, we're also going to be doing some rendering over in Blender. So the PBR metallic roughness X output preset, or output template, is just right about the perfect one that we need to use for our little project here. Don't be seduced by this Sketchfab one. Even though this is neat, this is going to require you to sign into your Sketchfab account while you're exporting. And I generally don't like to do this because I want to be able to control, and I certainly want to be able to see my textures and inspect them and make sure they're really good looking before I export them over into Sketchfab. This requires an account. It's also going to send the model. It's a great one-click solution to get your projects out over into Sketchfab, but we want to be able to use the project and the textures related to this project in a little bit more of a holistic way. So we're going to save this for a much later time. So I'm going to find PBR metallic roughness. This is, like I said, this is just a good middle of the road output template, and I use this for a lot. Now, the other ones that we need to look at very closely are the file types. Don't choose JPEG. The PNG file format is just about the most perfect file format for the type of work that we're using. A lot of folks, they transition this over into JPEG, and what you're going to get is a highly compressed image. The PNG file format is wonderful. It's compressed very little. It's got a tremendous amount of quality, and the file format is open source. The JPEG file format is actually controlled by an organization, and I like to use open source technology as much as I can, like Blender, to ensure that what I create belongs to me and no one anywhere in the universe is going to have a claim to the images that I create as Substance Painter. Now, the color information here, just keep to 8 bits. You don't need to do 16-bit images. If you're working on a feature film, then maybe 16-bit images are the way to go. This just logarithmically adds more colors into the image itself, and the type of work we're going to be doing 8 bits is going to be just fine. A 16-bit image is going to be massive in size, so you can do it, but just be aware that the image is going to be huge, and it's going to be like 100 megabytes for one picture. Keep in mind, we're going to have about 10 of these images that we're going to have to manage. PNG, 8 bits, just what I want. Now the size, this is actually pretty neat because we can adjust the size of our textures as we're exporting them. So if you authored all of your images with procedural textures in Substance Painter at like 2048 by 2048, you can actually upscale these images at export. Now this can be a little bit of a tricky situation if you're using a lot of traditional bitmaps inside of your texturing workflow. Those aren't going to scale, and you're going to lose a lot of quality. If you're using procedural images, which I definitely encourage, those are all computer-generated images. So the computer can scale and mathematically add more detail into the image when we output it at a higher resolution. This is another great benefit of trying to work with those procedural images in Substance Painter as much as we can, because we just have the most flexibility in how big or small we want to change our textures upon export. And the last thing, this is the padding. This is how the computer is going to create the pixels in between all of our UV shells. If you look carefully over here, I brought up the 2D image of my texture set for a reason. It was to talk about this dilation or this padding. This is going to determine how all of these gray pixels are going to show up inside the image itself. The dilation infinite is just about perfect. We don't want to change it. You really don't need to go in and look at some of these other ones unless you really have a specific use case scenario where that benefits the production process. But for the most part, dilation infinite is just what you want. Okay. For the type of work that we're doing, we don't need to export any of the shaders. We're using the PBR metallic roughness shader template as our root. This is a shader template that's been used just about everywhere. If we're using a customized shader inside of Substance Painter, then we need to export it so our rendering engine can use that information to correctly redraw or to correctly recreate our images in that world. But we're using a pretty standardized shader template, so we don't need to do that. Now, one of the things that I want you to look at very carefully is this output template. If you want to go in and make some changes, it's a good idea to look at it or to make some changes. And I like to go in just kind of inspect the output template. Now, this is going to show you a list of all the presets that come with Substance Painter. And if we find PBR metallic roughness, here's all of the images that the computer is going to create for us. It's going to export. And if you look very carefully, you can see that we're going to get a base color, and it's going to be the RGB and the alpha information. Pay real close attention to the color coding of all of these images that are created, because you can start to compare them from the list over here. So if I find this kind of purpley one, hey, check it out. It's going to put in the alpha channel of the base color texture all of my opacity information, which is really neat. I think that's pretty cool. It's also going to create a roughness. GR stands for grayscale, so this is going to be a black and white image for our roughness channel. We're also going to have another grayscale image for metallic. Our normal map is going to be RGB. Now let's look what type of normal map this is going to be. Now mine is the OpenGL. You may want to check this out. You may want to swap this. Sometimes if you're working on a PC, it could be like that. It could be the DirectX normal map. We want the OpenGL normal map. So I'm going to swap mine. There we go. And now the normal OpenGL converted map from our mesh map system is going to be included in this system, which is included in this export, excuse me. We're also going to export our height map out as a grayscale value. And then we also have an emissive map. Now, we didn't talk about emissive effects inside of Substance Painter. Those are the glows that you get, that you see around inside of the real-time rendering environment. We didn't do any glowing effects on our turtle, although that would be pretty neat to have maybe portions of a shell be glowing or neon. So it's just going, since there isn't any emissive information inside of our texture set, this last one's going to be ignored. You'll see a little warning pop up when we're exporting this that says, can't find emissive information, did not write it to disk. So this one's going to be ignored, but it's good to know that it's inside of the preset. take a look at all these other presets and find one that works for your rendering environment. I think for the most part, for what we're doing in this course, the PBR metallic roughness preset is going to be just fine. It's going to be perfect, and I really enjoy how this preset's set up. The only change that I made was making sure that I'm exporting out all the OpenGL normal information versus the DirectX, which is exactly what Blender and Sketchfab are going to be looking for. All right, so now that we understand our settings, we have a location, we have an output template, we know which types of files we're going to be producing. Let's go ahead and export the textures themselves. It's pretty straightforward. There's a gigantic button down here that says export. It's going to save all of my textures to this location on disk, and I'm pretty ready to do that. So let's go ahead and export our textures. It goes pretty fast. Luckily, Substance Painter has already drawn the pixels that are associated with all of these images as we've been working in the application. So it's just really a process of bundling all those images up and saving them to disk. You'll see over here that it says export complete, and it'll show you a list of everything that's been created. If you were to navigate over into the file directory, let's just do it real fast. Open the output directory. Here it is. And here are all the images that were saved onto my computer. And there's a bunch of them. If we were to simply inspect them real fast, you can see, there's our normal maps. Here's the one for the shell. Here's the base color for the body, the roughness. All of the images have been correctly exported out into our file browser. And now we're ready to start importing them into Blender so we can start applying them to our character.